Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Wednesday, July 8th, 2026, episode 541, and we're going to talk about anti-Semitism and anti-anti-Semitism. And I feel like I'm going to regret this episode, but gotta do it, right? Uh, let's see. I've been wanting to do it, but I'm doing it now. So when a topic gets to the point when rational discussion is no longer possible, then you know you're in trouble. Society is in trouble. People are in trouble. And the basic conclusion is that the accusation, people accusing certain other people as being anti-Semites, well, that's the new, you're a racist. In other words, when people would roll their eyes, when people would call other people racist, or they would collapse in fear, you knew that there was no longer any discussion, and people were just simply going at each other. So let's begin by reminding everyone that truth is subjective. That is the premise of this podcast, that truth is subjective. Believe whatever it is that you want to believe. I don't care. Everyone does it. Everyone chooses what to believe, decides what is true, and then they disagree with everyone who has a different opinion. Few things will get people to change their mind once they have decided what is going to be the truth. There are certain things which will change most of those holdouts to change their mind, but everyone else is basically a fanatic. They'll take those ideas with them to the grave. So, except for those people, I'm talking to everyone who is open to a persuasive argument. Everyone sees their whatever it is that they're observing from their subjective point of view. People who disagree, they disagree because they have a different subjectivity. They don't see the same things that the other person sees. And so they will never agree. They will never understand. And they don't understand why other people say and believe the things that they do. Now, think about two married people who are about to be divorced. Would they ever agree or even say that the other person has a point? No, that's why they're getting a divorce. Or we can flip it. Two people who are in love, all right, they'll see what they want in each other. All their friends might say, "Oh, that person's a dog. You want to get away from that person." And they'll say, "Oh, you don't know this person like I do." In other words, people who are in love, they'll begin the narrative, the description of the other person at their convenience, and they'll cherry pick information as they desire, because that's their subjectivity, right? They're in love, whatever that word might mean for people. So just saying that there are only two points of view doesn't determine or doesn't mean that either of those two points of view are even close to being right. In other words, it's never just simply anti-Semites and anti-anti-Semites, right? There's so many more perspectives here, which has, and most of them have nothing to do with anti-Semitism. And as with all things, as I've already said, I affirm the right of anyone to believe whatever it is that they want. Freedom of religion, right? The thing is that they have to pay or take responsibility for whatever happens next. So if you take a position and then start making choices based on that subjective position, well, whatever happens next is your responsibility. And I could be really close to someone, but I am still not going to pay for all of the choices that other people make. They're free to do whatever it is they want on their own, but they have to take responsibility. In other words, they have to pay for those choices. I don't have to pay it. And so you can believe that you should stand with Israel or Ukraine, whatever, or you can say, I will not. And we should just leave it at that. Like, you say you want to stand with Israel or Ukraine, fine. And people who say, no, I'm not going to stand with them. I don't even know any of them. And so you can just walk away and nothing happens. Um, but the problem is that there is the opportunity to coerce other people to agree with you. And that's through legislation. So whether or not that legislation is bought or leveraged in one way or another, it doesn't really matter. And then you get to the point of fanaticism. In other words, what tips the balance uh, of the discussion is when certain people gain the power of coercion. And then what you begin to see is a whole lot of fanaticism. People, because of whatever it is that they believe, they lose their words. And instead of using words, they use force, coercion, which of course is hypocritical, because it's the coercion which is being protested to begin with. Also, when you start forcing other people to agree with you or say, no, you got to see what I see, whatever, it's a load of hypocrisy. Coercion causes people to feel injustice and dislike the person who's using it, whether they're right or wrong, it no longer matters. Because you've elevated the discussion to the level of coercion, well, there's not going to be any kind of discussion. People are now just simply reacting to the coercion. And on the global stage, this is perfect. This is what governments actually want. They want you to only see the coercion. They don't want you to look at the history. They don't want you to look at the foreign policy. They don't want you to look at all the past events slash crimes slash atrocities that had gone on. And plus, because they have the bully pulpit, they control the media, they control a lot of sources of information. They can distort the picture. I remember with the whole Ukraine war, there was a town that was in Russian control, and then they lost it, and the Ukrainians went in there and they found a mass grave of over 300 people, men, women, and children in a mass grave. And immediately everyone said, well, it was the Russians because they were just here. What a lot of people don't know is that, and the city was Bucha, uh, is that Russians don't do that. It's the Nazi-esque Ukrainians who did that. And so before the cameras got there, those extreme Ukrainians went in there and murdered all of the people who collaborated with the Russians while they were in town. And then they left. And so when the cameras showed up, they just simply, you know, gave responsibility to the Russians. So you can carve and craft a narrative that fits your agenda. It really doesn't matter, okay? Because no one's really interested in the truth. People are just interested in finding and hanging on to little bits of information which will justify their own position. And because the other side will see more of the narrative or different parts of the narrative, they just can't simply agree nor get as fanatical as the fanatics. So, in other words, without the power of legislation, without the ability to use coercion, you can't censor other people. You can't, either side can't censor each other. And everyone, therefore, has a platform. And with all of this podcasting phenomena, literally everyone has their own platform. And so each person must try to persuade other people for support and for funding. And I'm sure that whether depending on what side you are of any of these conflicts, you could probably raise a lot of money until you can't, until you can no longer, uh, demonstrate that you have the possibility of winning. And this is why the Ukrainians are bombing Moscow. They're just throwing drones at it. Not that it's having any kind of military effect, but it has a propaganda effect. They can keep the fundraising going. But the rest of us, everyone else who basically sees all of this as a government psyop on one level or another, yeah, we just don't think about it and just go about our business. We don't have to give any money. We don't have to waste any of our time thinking about all of these political corrupt uh, activities overseas. We just simply go about our lives. But through legislation, with the incentive of quote unquote donations from other countries, uh, Some people have the comfort of being superior. They have that feeling of satisfaction that when they disagree with someone and then they narc on that person for being an anti-Semite, well, they're punished, right? And this is a completely false sense of being right. Just because you have the power of legislation behind you does not make you right. But that sense of being right, yeah, that's a false sense of self-righteousness, you see. It has a chilling effect on the other side and anyone who wants to make a comment. And that's why I said, am I going to get in trouble with this episode? Because there are a lot of people, even when I'm trying to explain what's going on, people will say, oh, since you're not explaining it in a way where I'm going to benefit, then you must be an anti-Semite. Well, we just are coming off of Freedom Weekend, right? July 4th weekend. And one of the things that the American Revolution was supposed to ensure to everyone was freedom of speech, no matter what that speech is. And I've gone over it before in other episodes. Yeah, freedom to the point where, yeah, you can yell fire in a crowded theater. And the reason why it doesn't happen, it's not because it's illegal, but because you would be responsible for any deaths that happen as a result of doing that. And so most sane people would not do it because they know they would get caught eventually, and they know that they would have to take responsibility for anything that happened, any damage, any injury, any death. Now, also because of legislation, people who feel most passionate have to pay little as compared to when there wasn't any legislation. What do I mean by that? Well, if you support a cause, then the money comes out of your pocket. If you get the power of legislation behind you, then everyone in society has to pay, which means less money is going to leave your pocket. Right. And that's what that kind of bugs me so much about the way things are in the United States. There are so many special interest groups in the United States, all trying to get a piece of the pie in Washington, D.C., so that they don't have to pay as much, right? If they so believe in their cause, they should be the ones who should be paying. But instead, they direct their money to lobbying, to peddling influence, or taking advantage of people who are peddling their influence, so that everyone has to pay and they don't have to pay as much. And because of the way things are, all of us do have to pay. And some of us have to die. And usually those people who have to die are not the people who are fanatics, right? They're not the people who are saying, oh, yeah, we all got to do this. Yeah, they never have to go and die, fight on the battlefield. No, no, someone else's kid, most likely families who really don't care about any of this stuff. Yeah, they have to go and die, especially if they start bringing back the draft, then okay, maybe there's a chance, a small possibility that some of these fanatical supporters, families will have to go and face the possibility of dying. But of course, they generally tend to be wealthier, and so they can buy an exemption of some kind for their children so they don't have to go fight for the cause. Every single war was like this. Donald Trump even got out of fighting in Vietnam because his dad claimed that he had some kind of physical disability that would prevent him from going to fight. And it turns out that was fake. Uh, but anyway, so there's that. So everyone has to pay generally, except the people who are most fanatical about it. Yeah, they don't have to pay as much. And so that's that shifting of responsibility that I constantly talk about. Now, what seems to be missed, because everyone's so focused on the immediate, but although I know a lot of people do know this already, but I'll just put it in words. What seems to be missed by a lot of people are the long-term consequences of today's actions. Like if you live in the moment, if you're only thinking about today, then you're not worried about what is going to happen 10 years from now, or 5 years from now, or even next year. So aside, so keeping off the table this episode, not, just having just mentioned the history and everything that led to these events, right? So, and believe me, that's a huge world of subjectivity back there. In other words, it's not so simple and say, well, if you just remember this, then it's obvious who's in the right. No, no, that's just cherry picking information, there is a lot of stuff back there, which makes it pretty not clear. So just being uh, against the war, uh, pointing out all the bribery and the corruption, bribery. Well, remember, we send a lot of money to Israel, a lot of money. And they take some of that money. Apparently, the money laundering scheme. They used to use FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried to launder their money. But since that collapsed, they would take some of that money, buy real estate in like Dubai. I mean, we're sending billions of dollars to Israel, so they can take some of that, a nice, a couple 10 million, buy some property in Dubai, and when it wasn't being bombed, right? And then when the property appreciates, they sell it and take the profits and reinvest it in America. And when I say reinvest, it's with quotation marks because clearly these are just simply bribes. It's an open secret. Everyone knows this happens. So just pointing that out makes you anti-Semitic today, which is kind of funny. But this creates a broad racialization of different opinions, right? So you become an anti-Semite for all kinds of reasons. And so the category of anti-Semitic, anti-Semite is hugely broad. I mean, you'll have people who really do hate Jews, and then you have other people who are, don't really even care. And then the anti-anti-Semites who are absolutely blindly in support of anything Israel does, no matter how brutal, how disgusting and vile their activity might be, they're still going to support Israel, including all of the self-destructive, unsustainable activity. Well, it's going to lead to the demise of Israel. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is the the category of anti-Semite is huge. It includes people who actually do hate Israel to the point of people who really don't care, or people who are actually compassionate and care about the future of Israel. And then the anti-Semites also are a huge category, which includes people who really hate Israel to other people who are so fanatically passionate about Israel, they'll die for Israel. And because of this goofy, weird racialization that has taken place, it will lead to the demise of Israel. Most of the Middle Eastern governments have moved away from Israel. Abraham Accords, yeah, forget about that. And then, which is basically some sort of cooperative agreement with Muslim countries or Middle Eastern countries and Israel. Yeah, that's dead. Also, a lot of the countries are moving towards a security agreement, right? So Middle Eastern countries, instead of depending on the United States, who obviously can't protect them, they are going to set up cooperatives with which includes Iran with the backing of China and Russia, right? So that's they're moving away from the United States and moving towards Iran, China, and Russia. So that will leave Israel isolated. And I just saw, I was going to listen to it at some point, but an episode that Colonel McGregor uploaded where because of the actions of Israel today, Israel will be in perpetual war forever until Israel gets so exhausted and all of their young people are dead. And so there won't be any Israel any longer. That's what they're setting up for themselves. Now, to say that is also anti-Semitic, but is it really? So anti-anti-Semites include true, actual anti-Semites. How about that? That's just it's so insane, right? So you get people who care about Israel on both sides of the anti-Semite, anti-anti-Semite equation, but all of it is so distorted. Uh, Also, we should keep in mind that and especially with my Iron Dome episode, we should all know by now that the US ability to defend against missiles, which is the primary weapon of Iran, is just simply not there. It is they can't do it. And plus, a lot of the ordnance, the missiles that the United States needs to produce in order to carry out attacks against any aggressor to protect Israel, yeah, they can't make them because there are no rare earths here in the United States. So there are rare earths, but there's no way to process them. One example is that the F-35, the new F-35, fifth generation fighter, they have none of the rare earth components in the aircraft. And so apparently the nose of the F-35 is supposed to carry, I don't know, like all these kilos of rare earth equipment, but they have none of it. And so instead of this high-tech equipment in the F-35, they have weights, gym weights to make up for the loss of weight to keep the plane balanced. Also, because we're funding all of these wars of aggression all over the world, there's going to be really high inflation. And when inflation goes that high, other countries are going to abandon the US currency as reserve currency. And so there's going to be a lot of inflation here in the United States. And so what will dollars buy any longer? I don't know. And even if you could buy 100 F-35s, if they have none of the high-tech equipment on them, what good are they? Um, Also, soldiers, where are you going to get them? I already talked about how a lot of soldiers in the military, they are soldiers simply because of moral waivers, right? They previously would have been unqualified, but because they're so desperate for troops that they'll even take criminals now, which is kind of insane. And I talked about that before. So in conclusion, uh, people who engage in force, it never ends well, right? Bullies get old or they have to graduate and then they become vulnerable. Bullies get old and then they become vulnerable. Countries get exhausted with population or their currency. Oops, my little alarm there, sorry. Uh, and then the country gets exhausted, right? The people get exhausted, the currency is exhausted, the economy is exhausted, right? Because you're no longer building productive goods, you're just building weapons, and you can't eat weapons. And so once they get old and vulnerable, then the other side then uh, takes over, and maybe they retaliate, and then we have another round of coercion and violence. It never ends. And then maybe we have more people who realize that we should have used words to begin with. So really, this is not just simply about anti-Semites and anti-anti-Semites. This is about pretty much everything. We should have used words to begin with. We should have used logic, even game theory. There's to map out where things are going to go and then try to figure out a different course of action. In other words, if you're going to sit there until your dying breath saying no, that the issue for us today, the most issue, and the only issue worthy of discussing is the anti-Semitism and the anti-anti-Semitism dichotomy. No, I still got to eat, man. Right? How does talking about that help me to eat? It does not. And so remember, this channel is not about determining who's right or wrong, but about trying to explain, you know, the battlefield and then help people to find choices to avoid coercion and hypocrisy. And when, as I said before, when the discussion gets so unhinged, it's hard to make any kind of case, especially once you start having censorship, then you don't even have a platform to make a case. And this is just this is terrible. And so the whole anti-Semite, anti-anti-Semite dichotomy is toxic, and there is no good conclusion that can come from that. I mean, people can still believe what they want to believe, but going about talking about it in such a toxic manner, yeah, it's not going to have a happy ending. But like Ron Paul, I have hope. And that eventually the cost of this hate that we see, which happens as a result of this kind of wanton racialization, anti-Semitism and anti-anti-Semitism, when the cost of that hate gets so high, people will beg for alternatives. Or they won't. But I have hope that eventually the cost of that uh, toxic debate will get so high that people will just get sick of it and look for something else. That's it for today. I'll talk to you next time, unless this channel gets banned.